right, we were back for another episode after a small break for Labor Day.
Little break.
Little break. Yeah, this time of year is always fun in the summer and when we're traveling, because you never know who's going to be on an episode from week to week and who you're going to get from the team that's not traveling, or at least as Laura as now is traveling and has the opportunity
on location.
to
on location.
record on location. So on that note, we thought today we would talk a little bit about our work with the colleges, because this is a time period where we're kicking off all those relationships. I will say this year looks slightly different than past years. But we're kicking off all of our relationships with the colleges. And so I thought I would just kick off with like a little bit of a background. So sort of like, once upon a time in OGX history, S2 Breakthrough at the time, just kind of how we started getting into the college world at all. And then really based how we do things is like based on what people want and what we need to be able to help athletes get better and to help colleges help athletes get better. We kept building and iterating and kind of what the product looks like today, and how that ties into kind of what we offer athletes also. But we started doing assessments in 2018. Is that right? 2019.
19.
Okay. So at that time we would take the sensors, and we only had a few schools, and basically we would take some of the information that we were collecting in-house and just go on the road, show them how we were collecting it. It would be a one-time thing where we showed up, we sort of collected some information, we gave them that. We kept that up through COVID. And then really in 21 was the first year where our product was, our assessment process was more established at that point. We had much more data to kind of know exactly what it was telling us, and sort of that we had put a lot of stories together with ball flight and things like that. So we went that year to 10 schools and just did assessments. So we sort of were like known at that point as the people who came and did the biomechanics assessments. And, we collected movement still, biomechanics assessments, ball flight. So we traveled around, collected all those information, gave them sort of access to that information for their pitchers. That product built and grew. And what I think was an important turning point for us is that we started, like really loving our assessment process and how helpful it was for the athletes, but really seeing internally how that kicked off that athlete's journey and how we could really incorporate those themes and what we were tracking to make them better, sort of in a training process. And so 3 years ago, we started having more ongoing relationships with schools where we were, coming to do the assessment, but then having these touch points with them throughout the year of how would you go after the things from the assessment? What would we be monitoring to make sure that's happening? What kind of information should I be looking at? And out of all of that and the work we were doing internally, HQ was born, which was we need to not have a Google sheet that we're all trying to put information into to track this. So it was built out of this need to do internal athlete, data visualization and management, which then our college partners were able to use. And now that has born a whole beast of, not only do we want to be able to see training data, but we want to be able to see in-game data and all of the things that come out of sort of what our college partnerships look like. Also coinciding with that was our partnership with Driveline. And so this year, our assessment process, we're able to take the launch pad on the road and get markerless motion capture in places. So the input of the schools that still do assessments with us is so much higher. The turnaround's faster. We're able to kick off those relationships on a quicker basis. And so that process has all sort of evolved into it. So what I think has been so interesting to watch this sort of evolution is we were sort of this we come in the fall, we educate you on who your pitchers are and maybe some things that you should tackle, how to maximize them based on this one assessment, to this, that's a piece of information that you could get so that you could really maximize training. But also we are serving almost exclusively in the capacity of that might be something a school does with us, but also the sort of main core product is this ongoing consulting with really HQ at its heart. To monitor, I saw these things in the assessment, but what are we going after? What are we tracking? What should I be looking at to make sure that at the end of the day, we're all out here making our athletes better and we're getting wins. So that's sort of the goal. So that's the backstory. That's where we are now. It's been a lot of change. Why I say it looks different is because now the turnaround's a lot faster. We're also hauling giant things around with the launch pad and setting up markerless motion capture and things on the site. We also are working with, we're able to do that for hitting as well. So we have a few schools where we're collecting those assessments on the hitting process. But I think knowing that kind of evolution of where we've been most helpful to schools and what the need has been, and really how to maximize just making athletes better, has been fun to watch evolve over the past few years. So maybe with all of that backstory, you could just take it, Laura, of like, what are some things you've seen as you've been on the road, as we're kicking off these partnerships, and, you know, what are some themes that are different this year about that, either with just what we're able to provide, or that schools are needing now that this is becoming more common, I think, or more commonplace to kind of get some version of information or assessments?
Yeah, I think that the biggest shift I've seen, and I think it's a really important one, is, you know, we prioritized our presence on campus through the biomechanics side. That's really where our expertise is. It's, you know, where my technical expertise is. And so educating the coaches, educating their support staff on how to collect movement quality, how to do power, because those are things they should be collecting multiple times throughout the year. Sitting down with a new relationship who maybe is unfamiliar with Rapsodo, and you know, how to tag pitches and how to export it. Like, there's a level of education and sort of this development of self-sufficiency for the college coaches and for those teams that I'm really proud that we can provide. We have slogged through the trenches of manual data input. And so to be at a point now where we can help the coaches get to, you know, data insights and biomechanics reports and just understanding the connections of movement quality and power for their sports medicine and strength staff, it's becoming this really educational tool. And we've for a long time always been asked, do we have a certification? Do we have an OGX certification? And yesterday it kind of dawned on me, it's like, this is a little bit of what it is. It's very, you know, geared towards the college level, but this is a little bit of what it is. It's this ongoing relationship where we're teaching some self-sufficiency. We're getting them to understand our systems that we put into play every single day in our facility at volume. I mean, the numbers of, you know, pitchers we have now in the markerless system is, I mean, it's incredible how far we've come just since January in capturing this volume of data. That's our advantage, that we do this at volume, we do this at scale. And so then we can come into a college staff where there's 6 to 8 pitchers, which I'm loving now. We have staffs of 6 to 8. It's a little bit more commonplace. And we're helping that staff to learn how to be self-sufficient, to understand these connections, to be able to bring in, you know, their sports medicine and strength staff into the conversation. And it doesn't feel like we're just these people now that are these, you know, these sort of like fly by night, come in and tell us how to do your job. We're trying to educate everybody and to get everybody on the same page, because at the heart of it is about making your team better, right? Whether it's at the individual athlete level or on the whole, from, you know, your hitters to your pitchers. I think that's been the biggest shift for us, has been our ability to say, like, no, this is how we tag Rapsodo. Here's where you're going to put it. And then to have HQ as this central place that they can go to, that they can see that data, that everyone is talking about the same information, I think it's really been very apparent to me how powerful that's going to be, not just for the fall. You know, we're really in our first round this fall with one, having all of our college partners have access at scale. And then, you know, as we're working still through some preparation for live outcomes and things that'll be more pertinent and probably effective starting in season in the spring. But right now, all that training information, so, you know, utilizing Rapsodo, like I said, movement quality, power, wellness questionnaires, that's all there. And so now that we've got all of our college partners using it, it's all centralized, and that they have the ability, you know, we have the ability to talk with them directly about that information. And they also know and can see what that process looks like. They understand the connection of movement quality and power because they do it. You know, they understand that process. And I think it's also so important that we've been training, you know, student managers and GAs. It's not just about the coaches. It's about expanding a system of player development beyond just the head coach, the pitching coach, the hitting coach. Right. That it's this whole concept. It's been a huge shift. And, you know, there was definitely some like kind of learning points for us when, you know, we realized realized with some new partnerships that we needed to take that extra step to support them in collecting those things that were not the markerless motion capture stuff. And we did that. And I think like we've left them in a better place, not just with the information, of course, but also in the sort of education and training that they're getting about our systems.
Yeah.
It's, we're real transparent about that. And I think that's just such a beauty of the system that we've created.
Yeah. I think, one thing I'm hearing, and it's interesting because I don't know if I've ever thought of it this way, but it's also what we have been focusing on internally with the athletes that we coach. But what the difference is, we used to come in and the only relationship we had with people was this one time, let us tell you about your pictures and then we're out. And so there was power in that because it's some education around things that certainly at the time when we first started this, there was really no other way to get that information, to see the things that we could see with the sensors, to even understand ball flight in that way. But what happens sometimes when that is the only checkpoint is that if that's the only time you ever measure biomechanics, so that's the only time you ever pull out ball flight, you start to lose sight pretty quickly of the monitoring of that. And so what we've really changed this year, not only with our college partnerships, but also a lot of the conversations we're having internally with our own staff and how we think about training, is you're trying to put in place this like monitoring system with your player development. And so a biomechanics assessment with this amazing sort of like launchpad technology and the insights that we are able to put in the report and thing is incredible. It's a piece of the monitoring system. Now, there are schools that are going to install launchpads, and that becomes a more common, piece of the monitoring system where we're getting biomechanics on a very regular basis. And that's incredible. That's a piece. The movement quality and power or force plates for the schools that have it, those things are other pieces of the monitoring. So we're helping them. What's the regularity? What are the insights? Really what we provide is, okay, here are all the pieces you have that you could be inputting into monitoring. We give you the insights because we know from the level and volume of data we have is like, what does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? What are we monitoring? What, all the way, is that good? Is that bad? But also, how have we influenced that when we've seen it in training, because we've had that sort of loop. So movement and power is a piece of that. Ball flight is a piece of that. Live game outcomes are a piece of that. So really over these past few years, we've just been building out it's like, first we collected way too much information years ago. We were like, what are we going to do with all of this?
I hate that version of our assessment, by the way, but it works.
Yeah. And then we slimmed it down, and now we've slowly been incorporating more and more pieces as they are relevant to the monitoring of a player development system, which is it can be based on data analytics, live outcomes, and things that we're seeing, all the way to biomechanics. And so we aren't just this place that comes in, sort of like walks in, gives you a piece. We're really trying to help schools incorporate their own monitoring systems in the way we have. And then, some of that we might give suggestions for. When you see X, this is how we would build training based off of that. And there are schools where they follow sort of our training systems very closely, and there are schools who don't. And that's not the piece of it. The piece of it is the monitoring system. So you can go try however you want in some ways to go tackle this, but can we build some system of this, monitoring conversations around that? And that's what our relationships on the consulting side help to keep focused, is that it's so easy for us as coaches, and we talk about this all the time, to get a biomechanics assessment. I just had a debrief with an athlete right before this. We'll give them the information. And then even when we're training them, that let's say this athlete, we work with remote athletes too, but is able to come in person with us every time she does her program, to just be in the trenches and think like, all is good, and start to remove yourself from the monitoring system, remove yourself from tracking the data, remove yourself from getting that person back in for a biomechanics assessment, remove yourself from these monitoring. And the further removed you get from it, the less our product it is, like the less you think it works, because you're starting to just bring such bias and subjectivity into things that you start to lose, like, are we doing what we said we're doing? So yeah.
And we have, we have lots of conversations, obviously internally and externally, about other ways and approaches to assess movement, to assess power. You mentioned force plates. There are lots of systems out there, whether they're individually created or commercial systems, whatever. And I think the beauty of launchpad installations, this is the part I can't wait to really start to be commonplace for our sport, is that the evolution of launchpad installations is going to mean that you can take whatever approach you feel comfortable, whether that is our movement assessment, our power assessment, somebody else's, whatever. What's ultimately going to matter is the monitoring of their patterns, is the monitoring of their swing, the monitoring of their pitching patterns, and then the connection to live outcomes. That is ultimately what translates and what's going to scale.
Right.
And so you have like, we have systems for that, and we're happy to share them, but coaches also are going to have the flexibility to say, this is what I feel. This is my art of coaching. This is how I want to approach this. And we have lots of our college partners that don't, as you said, that don't follow all of the pieces of the OGX system. And that's fine. And I just think like the ultimate sort of determining factor of like, is that working, is going to be one, of course, how it translates to the game and performance. But then, from a monitoring standpoint, at the highest level of monitoring we can get is launchpad installation, being able to use pitching pattern, swing pattern monitoring on a regular basis, not just from a player development standpoint, but from an injury monitoring standpoint, making sure that we're talking about effective patterns, safe patterns, especially for pitchers. And I think that's the beauty of it. It's like you can develop your own player development system. We can give you the pieces of that. It's what I kind of really referenced is helping our college partners that are new to us right now understand and learn what our systems are. But they may find in a couple years that they diverge from that. But with a launchpad installation, it's like, that's okay. Then let's just keep monitoring and measuring and making sure that that's translating into movement patterns that are effective. And then let's take the extra step and talk about live outcomes and make sure that the game performance is what's actually really being translated. And we know, hitters and pitchers can have lots of very weird, funky patterns and still be very effective. Yeah. And so you get to have both of those pieces and evaluate that very objectively. And I think that's a huge evolution for coaching mentality. It's a huge evolution just for our sport. I mean, part of the technology's here. I think this is also such an interesting point. The technology is here. We literally have it packed next to me. We're bringing it on the road. What has to evolve before that are training facilities, our indoor spaces, our places where our softball players actually train at the college level to be able to have this technology readily available. And so I think it's just an interesting, like the tech is there. This is one of the few spaces I think where softball technology, it's there, it's ready. And what we're actually have to wait for some evolution is the infrastructure. And so I think it's going to be an interesting couple of years as we start to see, our first college partners here installing launch pads, the value of that, the quirks and hiccups we're going to have along the way, and our partnership with Driveline is what's making that possible to be able to push again. Like, Ashley and I talked, I think a couple of weeks ago on the podcast about, we sort of tell the softball world the problems they didn't know they had and being disruptors in that space. And this is one of them. It's like, you have to have a training space that can accept this technology, keep this technology safe. It can be utilized. And that's gonna push what softball looks like on college campuses over the next 5 to 7 years. And that's what I'm excited about that. The tech is there. We got to get our infrastructure to catch up.
Well, and I think what we often say, and it has become so clear with HQ and just the data that's been inputted to it, and also the approach we've taken to the launchpad and the reports, is that it doesn't, like, if I collect ball flight on a pitcher and I just look at her ball flight and then I just arbitrarily say, your pitch does X and you have a -2 drop ball and I think we need to try to make it a -6. That's made up. Like, that is made, and we took that approach for a long time. Like, there
like
is
a bibbidi bobbidi boo.
Right. That you are just making up that's the right move there. And so where the game is finally, which, I just like have wanted to be in this space for so long, is that it is based off of what we are chasing and training is going to continue to get closer and closer to what works in game. And that is what we're going for when we're trying to scale pitchers and hitters. And then the sort of like biomechanics piece, because it has the insights of coaches who use it all the time, because as the insights of volume of softball athletes starts to tell us, insights that help us attack those things. And they're not just, we see X and therefore we're going to change it. It's based on context and insights that have been tested and used and trained. And I think that piece is, it's how we provide value in the monitoring, and it keeps trickling down. Like the example I gave, I always challenge, like sometimes you'll be training a hitter and you're like, this isn't working. Like she's not having success at the next level, or she's not having in-game success. And then in reality, you're like, right now, I said this all the time, like when a hitter hits the ball 70 at 16U, that might work depending on what that is matched with. That might work if she hits it in the air correctly and whatever. And if that exit velocity stays the same at 18U, all of a sudden you might see a drop off just in the outfielders can suddenly catch those balls. They're not gap shots. That power that doesn't hit that velo jump, or it just doesn't scale. And we know these things from the data we see. It's why you have to stay so connected to those monitoring systems. And that's really our goal, is to keep the colleges on track with that. I laughed because Driveline, we did hitting assessments this week at A&M, and Driveline posted about it, and someone, just like someone screaming into the sky. I don't even know who the person is, but some baseball dude wrote like, Driveline out there making focus so much on data analytics, and meanwhile their hitters have low batting average. And what was the other thing he said? Something whatever. But I thought it's just so funny. Like, okay, you're like, how I know you focus too much on data with this data point that I was like,
yeah, my favorite one
other data point. But I was like, I know what it said at the end. It was like, hitters aren't robots. And I thought, what a hilarious misinterpretation of what happens with the launch pad. Like,
that's right.
It is actually so the opposite of thinking people are robots. What it does take into account is what works. So for instance, if batting average is less of a predictor to be successful at the MLB level or at the college level than OPS, and what goes into OPS is that you can jump OPS if you have a 5 mile an hour faster exit velocity. Like, you just build the building blocks for what is going to build the thing that is going to help wins. So for hitting, what helps us win is the runs scored. So what feeds into runs scored, you work backwards into sort of like what matters. And that's how you look at it. That does matter. Now, how that feeds into a launch pad and how that helps is, what are the things that feed exit velocity, adjustability? If you're going to have a high OPS, you can't only hit one pitch location. So how are you going to be, adjustable in that way? So you work in these conversations, and there are points, like I think all the time, and we know this about our Driveline partners, and certainly we know it about ourselves, is that we get to points sometimes where we say, based on all of the information at this point that we have, we think this pitcher or we think this hitter should be having success at this level, and they are not. Let's try to figure out why they are not. Like, we're missing a piece, which is how we then started looking at something like release height, or we then started looking at this combination of spin rate and break and velo and the things Ashley talked about in the pitch stock presentation.
Or we have a conversation about performance anxiety. Like, we're talking about, they're not robots, they're human beings, right? And so as much as we can say in a training, and the whole point of a monitoring system that takes into account different environments is the point of, okay, you look great in training. Your bullpens look amazing. You are hitting the crap out of the ball in the cage. But something shifts in their neurological system when it comes to getting to a game situation. And like that's the point. And my favorite line I heard it was yesterday. I heard this. I won't give away who said that, but it was, I don't believe in data. I know what gets swings and misses. And I went, swings and misses are a data point.
Right.
Like, you don't like that data. You don't like that data over there that may contradict what potentially you chase from a training standpoint. But you're looking at data. When you look at, pitcher charts and hitter spread, like, that is data. Like, pigeonholing it into, well, it's data analytics and biomechanics is like, as you said, it's just such a sliver of the conversation. And I just think like it's completely missing the point. Humans are not robots. It's absolutely correct. And there are times where someone has phenomenal, numbers and training and it's not
Yeah.
translating.
Although
And
like
that's where you're
tiny percentage, often we're like
right.
too removed from the data, or like I said, we don't, there's the realization that sometimes given the state of each sort of evolution of tech and things, it's like there were limitations. So then we either overcame that with, there was technology created to
Right.
overcome that limitation, or the limitation is we weren't looking at all the right things. We needed to pull in more metrics and really getting to that core of, data can answer, like, am I good enough for this level? What is going to scale? Does this scale? Like, it can answer those things. And in very rare cases, Ashley and I just had this conversation the other day, your data, with every information we have, it says you should be having success and you don't because you can't perform on that. It is so rare that is
Very
actually the
rare.
case. It is
Yes.
almost always the case that like you keep saying this person should have success here, but we don't think she should have success here. Or, like and then there are the instances, which, like I said, that we're like, this kid doesn't seem to have any performance, anything. The numbers are sticking because that's what we can see now, right? It's like the numbers
Absolutely.
are sticking in game. Nothing's changing. The numbers are sticking and it's not having success. And then in those cases, which are also, they're rarer and rarer, the more data we get that happens. But there are cases where we're like, we're missing something. We're missing the thing that makes this different than A, different than B. And we're looking to that, and you keep just diving into that. But I think that there are just, I think to your point of like, the assumption when people say, and it's like kind of crazy that people still say this, but here we are. The assumption when people say that they don't like data or they don't want to use data in their monitoring system is, I can understand that when you have built in your mind that the data being picked is like randomly cherry picked.
Totally.
Like,
Absolutely.
it's like when people are obsessed with this idea of like launch angle swing because they feel like people got they're convinced that the data is like so honed in on this one thing where we're trying to hit the ball in the air. It's like, I laughed. I think Devin from Driveline posted like news alert, all home runs hit last season in MLB were in the air. Like, it's like, but there is an element when this like one data points, like if all we were like, you had to throw hard, like you had to, velo is the only thing, like, and then people get like really hooked on the idea that we're like obsessed with velo, but it's like, that's not how an actual data informed, data driven monitoring approach works. It doesn't just like, it just doesn't, the data tells you what works. And then that's what you start working towards. You don't just say, we need higher launch angles and therefore our system is going to be built around this idea of launch angle. That's not how it works. And so I think, I'm not sure why people think that's how data works. Like, I'm not sure, but that's, yeah.
The number of times that in the last, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 months that, I've taken a sales call and it's been, I went to a camp and I was told that my spin rates had to go up. And like
Right.
softball has this problem of, if a little is good, more must be better. We have
Right.
a problem with that.
Yeah.
If we see that something is there's a 0 and a 100, we always want to be at 100. We have trained break profiles out of pitchers by chasing velocity at all costs.
Right.
I mean, that was what Ashley's pitch talk presentation was about, break profiles and spin rates, and then a layer of velocity and what actually played in the spring with 50,000 plus data points from Yacker Tech. Like, that was not just like our opinion. And so softball has this problem that if we get a little bit of it, then we have to maximize it. And so first it was velo. It's still velo, of course. Then came spin efficiency as we had more information about reps. So it's like, you got to have 100% spin efficiency. It's like, why? No, you don't. We have to know more components of that.
Right.
If your spin direction is 6 o'clock, no, you don't. If you want to create top spin. And then now it's spin rates. My spin rates have to go up. And it's like, do they?
Well,
Do they? It can be bigger than that.
Right. I think it's just interesting because it's like, yes, at the high school level, do the large majority of pitchers that walk in our door need some focus on velo? Absolutely.
Sure.
We know that velo, like, you're not going to throw 56 with an asterisk. Actually, I shouldn't say never, but you're very rarely going to throw 56 and go pitch at the SEC level. unless you got some weird, funky off-speed stuff.
Yeah,
So
you got some funky stuff, right?
yeah, there could be an exception, but you're very rarely. So if that's your goal, then we know what scales is yes, your underlying velo needs to go up, and we're going to look at ways to do that. But then you hit these thresholds, and this is why things are data driven and data informed decisions, which is nuance. You know, the most obvious example that we have seen is the backsman pitch. We've talked about it in a variety of ways, but it's like someone has a rise ball, they throw it 60, they throw their fastball 67, and then everyone is convinced you need to throw that rise ball harder. So what we know, and there's a whole bunch of components that go into this. One, we know that pitcher, to keep that spin, is not going to be able to get it close to her max. So we're talking about a jump that maybe you could make of like 2-3 miles per hour. So let's say she threw it 58 and you're like, we need to get that closer. We need to get it 62. What we've seen is a 62 mile an hour version of that pitch is not good. It doesn't play at the next level. And so in reality, the data tells us on that particular pitch, we might want to take some speed off, or we might want to keep it where it is. And so the data tells us that. Now, was there a time 5 years ago where we might have told that pitcher the same thing? Like, this doesn't sound right. You can't be throwing a 56 mile an hour pitch and a 67 mile an hour pitch. Like, we got to get this pitch harder. Like, it can't live in here. But that's why you keep getting information of what works. And like I said, it's why in-game data is so valuable, because now the loop can be so tight of what is actually working at this next level. And so, for instance, where our live outcomes are going is if I put data in there and I see, a pitcher had a 20% whiff rate on her changeup, what we want to know is like, that seems, you could just say that needs to go up. You have to, but that would be made up. And so what we want to understand is,
it's arbitrary.
Is that good or bad? Is 20% good or bad compared to the data we have right now? And that is how you keep evolving and understanding things. So it's like, if that is, it's, I give the example all the times. I think it's such an obvious one, but there was a time period where MLB changed, where every single person threw a two-seam fastball low and out, that we were just convinced, like, that's what you throw to be successful. You throw that 95 or whatever. And when they actually started looking at in-game data and they had it, they realized that pitch actually got hit. And so they started switching people to throw four-seam fastballs and to kind of change how they use that. And that pitch went way down in how much they used it. Now I think it's actually flipping a little bit, because then the swings evolved to that. And now we just keep looking at the data and changing what people throw. And I think that's the fun part of data. So that's
the battle of offense and defense. I mean, that's this, we keep saying like, oh, they're in this loop, but it's more of an upward spiral. It's like whenever pitching makes a change, hitting makes a change. Whenever hitting makes a change, pitching makes a change. And then the entire game grows. Right. That's the war of offense and defense. And to me, it's beautiful. It's like, as a former pitcher, I'm like, always, even when I look at hitting data, I'm like, how am I going to exploit that? How am I going to, throw her as a pitcher? Because that's where my brain is wired. And I think like that's the beauty of player development, is that you constantly have these two sides of this battle that you get to play off each other and figure out what works, see how it plays out on the battlefield. And like, that's how the game evolves.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, like sort of like in summary of what we're doing here is we're trying to make athletes better. And so anything that we've helped implement or systems we built have come around this concept of, what does it mean to get better in this? Like, how do we know if an athlete's getting better? And we have evolved and built more and more ways to know how an athlete's getting better. And then as for us, because we're a training facility, we're like, how can we then influence that? It's like, how do we know if an athlete's getting better? And then how can we efficiently do that? If we know in order for this pitcher to be successful, she needs to add 4 miles per hour, then how can we do that? And so that's where plyo programs were done, overload and underload concepts were done. And we found these sort of like efficient systems of doing that. And so I think you just keep evolving, and you have to be tied to this concept of like, it can't anymore just be, well, she's better because she looks better and I think she's better and it sounds good. It has to be tied to real measurements of if it's getting better, which ultimately, the highest way to measure that is the top of our game, does that have success at that level in game, which is what we're trying to get to ultimately. And so that's how it all ties to, a biomechanics assessment is a way to monitor, what am I chasing? And then is it getting better, right? When I sort of retest. A ball flight is a way to monitor, am I getting better? Am I having actual influence on her performance numbers. And then the inputs to that are training. And that's what we're kind of saying is that we believe in our systems because we are tied so closely to if it works and we're monitoring that thing. So we certainly believe in the systems we implement from a training standpoint. But the training is almost like, as long as it's fed by, is it working? There's probably a lot of different ways to explore that. And so any monitoring system, I think to your point earlier of like, you can use whatever you want, but any monitoring system you're using needs to be able to tell you objectively, is that athlete getting better? And where we sometimes go astray is like, we talked about force plates, for instance. I'm going to talk about performance numbers or like strength and power numbers. So a lot of the schools have force plates at this point, and that's great. And maybe you're just using that to monitor that athlete against that athlete, meaning like, is that athlete getting better? What gets a little tricky about that is when it's removed from the context of the game as a whole and what matters in the game. So let's say we're testing vertical jump on the force plates. You have to ask yourself, does that matter? So yes, you could see that athlete is increasing from my weight room is making that athlete increase vertical jump. So it's like, okay, that's a measurement that your training program is having a positive influence. But does that matter for that athlete in our sport that she went up in that? So there's all of these sort of like nuances of questions you have to keep asking of your monitoring system, which is, does it tell you how that she gets better for softball? And does it tell you she gets better? And does it tell you she gets better in a way that will matter for her on the field? Those are the balance of things and things that we're always kind of challenging ourselves to look at and ask and bring to the colleges. So I'm super excited. I think our partnerships this year are like, they just get stronger every year because the schools really start to see the power of all of this. The loop with how much we can help the athletes get better just gets tighter and tighter. And so I'm like super excited to watch our partners this year just continue to do these things. What's one thing, I guess, what's the thing you're most excited about this year, Laura?
I'm so excited to bring our vision of live outcomes to HQ. I'm so excited for it. I keep, we're putting together some of our like initial implementations of it. We've got some pitching stuff in there, but there's so much more I think that we can do and from just an interface standpoint. And that's the piece I'm really looking forward to, is that we've had the training data for a long time. We've been able to show that even with our Google Sheets stuff, we were able to show those trends. And I think now showing this connection between that and the live outcomes for both sides of the ball, for being able to show for pitchers and hitters to have this conversation around what actually is playing in the game. That's the thing I'm most excited about. I think this is going to be our biggest evolution point in HQ through the fall, is getting feedback from our college partners as we continue to iterate that and get that ready for January. And yeah, it's going to be, I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Really looking forward to it.
Me too. All right. Well, until next week, when you'll see some assortment of people from OGX next to OB.
It'll be a surprise.
It will be a surprise. And also next week, I'll be 40. So that's exciting.
Yes, you will.
Yes.
Yes, you will. Welcome to the club, girl.
The big over the hill moment. All right. Well, until next week, we'll see you then. I need you to like and subscribe and review the podcast so that we can keep making it every week for you. And maybe even drop what topic you'd like us to talk about or rant about or whatever we do every week.